Hello and welcome to Left of the Projector. I am your host Evan, back again with another film discussion from the left. You can support the show on Patreon at Left of the Projector Pod. You can also follow, rate, subscribe at leftoftheprojector.com. This week on the show, we are dialing it back to the year 1994, and we're covering this week a film, the first film by Kevin Smith, and of course I'm talking about Clerks, made on a budget of just $27,000 and netting $4.4 million, a runaway hit, an unexpected hit, which is now on the National Film Registry in the Library of Congress. Joining me this week, I have back on the show, friend of the show, Smirk Gently, as well as the co-host of Movies vs. Capitalism, I have Frank, and lastly, I have Levi, one of the co-hosts of the podcast, The Intervention. I hope you enjoy this week's episode.
Sit back in your seats, get something to eat, and watch this movie. Don't let the kiddies see it, because, well, we'll let you hear the beginning first. Thank
you. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Evan. Everyone's being so polite. No one wanted to be the first person to say thank you.
Or speak over the other one. It's always when you have a few people, it's the dreaded thing there. So I guess the first thing I think I mentioned to a few of you already, that in thinking about Clerks, it's been a long time since this movie came out, 1994. So 30-year, anniversary now, I guess, for the film. And wow. I was thinking about this earlier today. I actually have a vivid memory of the first time I saw the movie. Like where I was, who I watched it with. I don't really remember my reaction to the movie, but I'm wondering if any of you have a memory of if not the first time you watched it, if you remember seeing it. I assume no one here saw it in the theater. Everyone was probably too young. I was, yeah. And no one saw it in the theater. I mean, so I'm wondering what everyone remembers of this Kevin Smith black and white.
I think I want to say I saw it maybe sophomore year of high school, 'cause that was when me and my friends got into Kevin Smith. I don't think this was the first Kevin. I think we probably saw Mallrats first, and then someone was like, well, you got to go back and watch his art house film, Clerks. And yeah, I remember at that age, it definitely thinking it was hilarious, and clocking that I'd never seen a movie that was just talking. Like there's some set pieces, there's some plot that happens, but like only on the periphery. And this really is like a movie, and the conversations it's not like a play where the conversations are driving action. It's literally just two people talking about shit. And I remember seeing that and being like, whoa, I didn't know that you could just like spend 5 minutes just talking about Star Wars and has nothing to do with the film. So I remember loving it for that.
This is one of the movies that my brother, he would go through these phases. Every couple of months, he would switch to a different one. It would be like Breakfast Club at one point, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He watched like a million times, Half Baked. And then this one, I think I was like 9. So he would have been like 12 or 13 at the time. Every time he would be over at my dad's for the weekend, he would watch it. So I saw it probably like 50 times. So I can't pinpoint an exact specific first time I saw it, but we lived in Jersey. That's where we grew up. So it was kind of cool for me.
Oh, same.
Yeah. So I lived in Edison, which is not super far from Leonardo, like Asbury Park and all that. So it was cool for me as a 9-year-old who didn't really get most of the jokes or anything, seeing places that were familiar to me or caring about them. And then watching it a few years later and being like, why did my dad let my brother show me that movie?
I remember it must have been like 1995 or 1996. So I was in maybe first or second grade, and we had this family friend named Mike that was really into like alternative culture. And he got this video from my parents on a bootleg tape. And he's like, you guys got to watch this. Like, this is revolutionary. This is brand new. My parents popped it in the VCR, and this guy, Mike, was known for just like giving us outlandish things. And my parents and I were all watching it together. And I think it's right after the 37 line. My parents had to pause it and were like, we can't watch this with a child. But I remember they were talking to me like, okay, Levi, we can't condone you watching anything like this. But if you're going to watch it with your brother. Don't watch it with us. So I had an older brother and we finished watching it together. But I can't say I remember anything about it except it being turned off and I was being told that this was too bad for me to watch.
Yeah.
Because as like a 7-year-old, I had no idea what was going on. But yeah, I revisited it in early high school. And I think that's really when I saw Clerks, because I could kind of comprehend what was going on.
Yeah, I was also probably around 16, and I had a friend who was really into movies. He'd always go to his house, and he'd have gone to Blockbuster or whatever, and rented a bunch of movies that that weren't mainstream. They were just kind of, he ended up going to film school and the whole thing. So he was really into it then. And he invited me over, and he said like, "Oh, I rented this movie Clerks. Like, have you ever heard of him?" Like, I literally have no idea. I don't have, the internet was like barely a thing, and so mid-90s, I guess, a few years after it came out, and we watched it, and I don't think I really understood why it was so different, except there are times where I think I told him, like, is anything going to happen in this movie? Like, is they just going to, was there any plot? And then, then not watching it for a number of years and then seeing Mallrats, and then the same thing happened. Like, oh, I got to go back and rewatch Clerks. And then I finally saw it as understood more of the jokes and saw it as a good movie too. And it's also the fact that it was in black and white. I don't know, as a kid, you probably think, like my kids too, like you see a movie in black and white, they're like, oh, this is like old and weird and I don't want to watch this. And so that was also kind of part of the, I don't know, at first the bad, a strike against it, but then later it kind of added to the charm. I can't imagine it being in color at this point. I know, isn't there a version, did someone colorize it? I think someone did.
Some probably. Someone with too much free time.
Yeah, and colorize it. And like, I feel like that would ruin it. But yeah, so I mean, I think this movie, it's been around for so long, and it has, spawned this entire universe. Frank, you were on when we discussed the movie Dogma, which comes a number of years after this movie. But I'm wondering if, I was kind of like racking my brain. I was talking to Levi earlier about, like themes of this movie. What would you take from it as far as any kind of political stance? I mean, you could say it is a kind of a liberal leaning movie, and I'm wondering what you all think. You're not meant to take, like what Kevin Smith was trying to go for, but what you might perceive as any kind of discernible, quote unquote politics out of it.
Yeah, I think the sort of answer around your question, since we talked about this together, I think this movie in itself, it even works because it captures in a funny kind of earnest way the way that white male Gen X individuals became disillusioned with the world. And it's just like all packed in this single movie. It states that people suck, that life sucks, and above everything, work sucks. But there's nothing else you can do. So the film only has, as we have already said, like this threadbare plot. The characters, they wax philosophical, but they don't really say anything the entire movie. And it just ends up being this weird mishmash of references and cultural touchstones. And there's no real discernible political statement other than sort of this nihilism or this just deep disillusion with the way the world is going. Like, things don't seem that bad. They're really not that great either. Things just kind of happen around the characters in the way that life just kind of continues to happen.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this movie it's one of the best depictions of like the strife of the working person. There's only a few movies that come up like to the top of my head that really captures what it feels like to work a shitty service job like this in such an accurate and honest way, like the verisimilitude of this world that he's built. And you can feel it. You can feel like, this is a dude who's worked these jobs and hated them and has so much to say about them. So it really nails like the tedium of being a worker at a low paid service job. Having to deal with like the aloof, non-existent boss, having to deal with, customers and just like all of the bullshit that goes into like, running a convenience store, like just like dealing with the lock on the gate not opening up. And like, now you smell like shoe polish all day and like, you don't have any change for the change. So it's like all of that bullshit. But in terms of politics, I feel like this movie, and I don't like blame Kevin Smith, you know, he's not like, probably wasn't like reading Marx at the time, but like for him, the villain of this movie are the customers and not the boss. And that for me is kind of like its biggest miss in terms of having like a more coherent, you know, anti-capitalist politics of any kind, because he really like puts all of his enmity on like the people that come into the store rather than his boss, who has like forced him to work on the weekends. So that I feel like is the one missed opportunity politically, but because like the customers didn't create this system, you know, they're just operating within it. But he really hates those customers.
Yeah, I think in a respect, you can kind of extrapolate Dante's attitude towards his job and the way that he views his situation as like all these terrible things keep happening to him and he has no control over it. And like my girlfriend was with all these guys and everything is terrible and it keeps happening to me. But you can kind of extrapolate that to like a much larger sense of like later on when Randall's telling him, like, you know, you didn't have to come in. Like, nobody twisted your arm and forced you to be here. You do have some control over your situation. Not as far as, like, in an individual sense, but if you kind of expand it to the working class as a whole, I guess you can kind of make that connection where there is more power than we necessarily use and are comfortable exercising. We feel very much, like, trapped where we are. But it's hard to see past Dante just being such like a whiny little bitch, like the entire I feel like that probably gets lost a little bit because the customers do suck, but yeah, they're not like the villains. They're just, I mean, I feel like Dante's the villain. I feel like he's very much
agree
bad guy.
Yeah, entirely.
Why did these women want to be with him? Two of them, and they're both
fighting over him.
Yeah, 12 of them. There's like nothing.
Bringing him lasagna
and like when even yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the villain. Like they don't really, you know, he does get annoyed at the boss for, you know, going off to Vermont. He learns later when he calls him on the phone, and then he starts apologizing. You know that you know Randall's making fun of him for always apologizing to people. He could easily just be more angry at the boss, but he just kind of is like, well, you know, it's I'm just gonna forget about that and just complain to Randall and my other, you know, people who come in and get mad at customers because it's easier to like punch at those people than it is to punch at the boss. I mean, I get that Kevin Smith was making this film based on his own like experiences working at these places. So he must have hated his boss, although the owner of the place did let them film there for free. So, you know, I guess maybe he in his mind was thinking like, well, the boss, quote unquote, isn't the villain in this, you know, this story. If you could even call it a story.
I was going to say, I think we've touched on something that Dante seems to be the greatest person in the way for his own actions, right? And it's not just that he's punching down on the customers. I mean, he complains about his friends that drink all the Gatorade. He complains about his girlfriend that he doesn't like but is in love with him. He complains about the girlfriend that's using him but he loves. He complains about Randall constantly. And it's really Randall that gets him to complain about the customers even. He at one point defends the customers to Randall, that they have a responsibility as clerks to the customers. But Randall's really the one that pushes him to attack the customers as well. He's just a miserable sack. He has no allies in his world. He is constantly besieged in his little fantasy.
Yeah, I thought the Gen X thing you said is really spot on, because it's like emblematic of this specific generation of like Gen X white dudes who all, you know, grew up during the late 70s, 80s, saw the Reagan Revolution, and at this point the American left is non-existent, so they have no language to explain like why things seem to be getting shittier and why like the corporatization of America seems to be like degrading American culture. So that's when we start to hear people, you know, say like, oh, you're just a sellout, but the truth is that like pretty much everyone that's Gen X still had access to like the upward mobility that the boomers did, you know? Like I'm sure, like I know a ton of most of my bosses have been Gen X guys, and they're like, yeah, man, I wasn't a sellout. I'm like, didn't you buy this house for like $75,000? Like, shut up. Like, what are you complaining about? Like they got to do both. They got to be like complain about it, but then also still like, you know, get a fixed rate mortgage and like not go into like massive debt to go to college and everything. I think Gen X, the boomers are terrible, but Gen X, they're the most worthless generation, in my opinion.
Oh, you're going to get some comments on this one, Evan.
I don't.
Yeah, I might have to back away from those statements. I never stated that clearly. But
No,
I think
no,
it's important even...
I'm quoting Levi here. This is what Levi said earlier. I'm just repeating it.
All right. So please direct your comments to Levi.
At Intervention Pod. Yeah, that'd be great. I think it's worth noting as we sort of rip into this movie, just to keep it in perspective, that Kevin Smith, when he wrote, directed, edited, produced this movie, he was all of 23 years old.
Damn.
Yeah.
I mean, it's impressive, and it's worth digging into the message of this movie, even though it's written and created by a bunch of 21, 23-year-olds. But we do have to realize that this is Gen X before Gen X got those stereotypes.
Sure.
This is a guy that really has not made it.
Yeah.
I mean, in the same way that Kevin Smith is the Gen X stereotype today, in that he has no training, has not, went into $27,000 debt, made this movie with a bunch of friends, and is now easily worth millions of dollars. So he's both.
This position of like they spent like 20 some odd $1,000 making this movie, and I didn't know until I looked it up that they made a Clerks 3. Apparently, that came out like 2 years ago. I had no idea. They spent $7 million on that movie. Like, just the huge gap in, I don't know. I mean, that one didn't make very much as compared to like what they spent on it. But yeah, it's very much, they're different people now. He's a different person, and this is a totally different thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I'll just say, I was speaking about Gen X more broadly, not Kevin Smith specifically. I fucking love Kevin Smith. Like everything you're saying, like this was just like his primal Scream movie. He was like, if I'm going to make one movie, I'm going to make a movie about what my experience has been. And he nails it. And so we're talking about like the politics of the movie because that's what this podcast is. But like, I don't ding him at all for making the movie that he made at the time. And, like I've worked enough in service, especially at that age. If someone was like, what would you make a movie about? I'd be like, I'd make a movie about how shitty all these people that I have to serve are. Like, they're the worst part of my job. So I totally get it.
Just like the one thing that seems really off about this movie is it's supposedly following a guy that works at a video store, written by a man that's obsessed with film. And the only movie they talk about the entire time is Star Wars. Probably one of the most popular pedestrian movies ever made. It's just very odd to me. They don't mention movies in this movie about movies.
I think at the time, like a couple of 20-something guys talking about Star Wars, like just like apropos of nothing, was what could kind of be considered like I don't want to call it counterculture, but it's very like a nerdy sort of geeky thing. Like it's not as like whatever as it is now that they've made like 50 more of them and a bunch of other associated projects. Like even when I was middle school, high school, like nobody gave a shit about Star Wars really, like except for the very few people that I hung out with. So yeah, I mean that in that respect, like that one part, he kind of like tips his hand as like, oh yeah, like I'm a big nerd, but now that would be nothing. Like anybody could talk about it. It's very much commonplace.
And you could totally see the people in this movie, the characters being the people now that are whining about how like Star Wars is woke or something. Like, oh, they've ruined Star Wars or whatever. But the other thing I was thinking is so much of this movie was based on experiences that Kevin Smith had. So apparently he and his friend who were in film school together, who ended up making this movie, they I'm at the moment I'm blanking on his name, Scott Moser. Yeah. They would have conversations at like coffee shops about Star Wars, and they would see people listening and start to escalate their conversation to just say ridiculous things. So that apparently is just pulled from, obviously it's scripted in this case, or mostly scripted. A lot of, as you've watched some of the things about it later on, it seems a lot of it was ad lib because of they had to just throw it together. It's almost a miracle the movie was made, but all of these little things are kind of like vignettes of slices of his own experience. And, I guess like I say, like you said, Frank, I don't think you can fault him for what he was doing. He didn't know at all what he was doing. He was just, I'm going to write this script, and then if it comes out, it comes out. And if it doesn't, I don't care. I made it. That's the end of it.
And the Star Wars conversation, in my opinion, has some of the strongest politics in the whole movie, because it's basically a story about, what happens when you collaborate with fascists. And, from Randall's point of view, he's like, oh, well, those poor guys. And then the contractor comes along, and he uses like the analogy of like his friend who worked for the crime boss. But it's like, yeah, if you're going to align yourself with these destructive evil forces, then, some shit might come and, bite you in the ass later on.
Yeah, especially considering that Star Wars was, written by Lucas as an allegory for, American imperialism, and the Empire was America. So, it's not that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of that was him trying to impart political commentary or just simply was funny to him. I don't think I saw anything about that scene in general, but yeah, I mean, I mentioned how much of a miracle it was that the film was made. You could probably spend a whole hour of a podcast just talking about the, production and how they did it. But they're just, a lot of the scenes were filmed in just a couple takes, and they just had to hope the sound matched up, and they just, filmed at night in the place he worked. So like they were filming at night inside, and, there are all these crazy stories that, it's, I don't know. I don't know. Somehow it's like a movie that you think of as this film trapped in time. There are a lot of movies like this. Jaws comes to mind. Obviously it's a bigger budget movie, but it was, was almost canceled through filming, and all these movies that somehow these movies that like stand the test of time, there's always some story about it almost didn't get made. And this is one of them.
Yeah.
You can kind of apply the conversation about Star Wars a little bit to like Dante's whole thing, where he's actually arguing on the side, or is he? Randall's the one saying like, well, those guys were victims, basically, right? Is that what he's saying? Like the contractors, They didn't know what they signed up for. They're all victims. And Dante's like, oh, like they knew. I guess you can kind of stretch it to say like, well, based on Dante's situation, he spends this entire time complaining about his job and he doesn't want to be there. But like, he knows that this is the job. Like he knew he was going to come in today and be miserable the entire time because it was supposed to be his day off. But he went ahead and did it anyway, whether because he can't stand up for himself or whatever it is. Like his situation is what it is and he's aware of it, but he's not doing anything to change it. Like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of the conversations in this movie that they have, I feel like are supposed to kind of reflect on his whole mess of a life. So for me, that's kind of what it feels like. Not a one-to-one, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely Dante's like, his arc is like he starts in Arrested Development, and then by the end of the movie, he's like, I guess most of this is my own doing, or I'm not taking enough agency in my own life, or I'm the one who keeps putting on these things. It's like, this isn't good enough, this is bad, or whatever.
Yeah, and then if they kept the original ending, then the Star Wars conversation would have made even more sense.
And the original ending, just to ruin it for anybody listening, is Dante dies.
Yeah, he gets shot. Right, somebody walks in and shoots him. Yeah,
they rob the convenience store and murder him right after Randall leaves. And there's no videotape evidence because they turn it off at the beginning.
I decide if that would be like funnier or
that'd be really depressing, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but also funny in kind of a dark way. I don't know.
I think Kevin Smith claims that he did that in homage to Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, which has this comedic movie that has an incredibly dark ending.
Yeah.
Sure.
But apparently every note that came back on the movie immediately was that they got to cut that ending, that it made no sense for the character arc or for the plot or anything.
Yeah,
it turns it into a tragedy.
It kind of like makes him into, I was gonna say, it makes him to like a tragic figure that you now feel bad for him, as opposed to seeing him as this douchey whiner for, almost 2 hours, just complaining about every single thing you could complain about. And, yet still doing all these things. Yeah, I think like towards the end when Randall said like, you didn't have to go to this funeral. You didn't have to go to, play hockey. You didn't have to go do all these things, but he does them anyway, because at the end of the day, he does have like this agency over himself. So he could have not come in, but then we wouldn't get the line like, I'm not even supposed to be here today. And then what would we do?
Yeah, I think to try to string together a number of things that we're saying here, the ethos that Dante rolls on is that story he tells about how he, I think, craps his pants because his toilet seat was down as a child. And he says that defines his character, that he's just not able to change things in order to make his life better. And then to draw that into the material reality of Kevin Smith and his friends. Kevin Smith is Dante in the story. He's living this life. And he decides that he's going to try something big, and he maxes out all of his credit cards, and he makes this film about his life, which by every single metric should not have been a success. I mean, it was a bunch of friends, a bunch of people that had never filmed before, a bunch of people that had never acted before. And they end up making a movie that grosses, you said, over $4 million on a $27,000 budget. Like, it's insane.
Yeah.
And ends up working. And I think you made the comparison to something like Jaws, but I don't know what this movie actually compares to, because when I saw Jaws as a kid, I didn't think, whoa, this is just like life. I could make this. Whereas when I saw this with friends, and we eventually tried to do this, like me and my friends tried to make a movie because we love this movie so much. And I'm sure it inspired a ton of people to just go out and try with a camcorder, because they felt like, oh, these are just two guys sitting behind the counter at a convenience store. And this is a movie that made $4 million. I bet I can do something just as good, if not better than that.
Like Blair Witch might come to mind as like a cheap, low budget kind of thing that probably had no right to make millions of dollars, but did. I don't know. I haven't seen that in a long time, but yeah, I mean, it's almost like I don't know if you would say this is what you're meaning, Levi, is that, he complains like, the Gen X or complains about, not being able to make it and everything. And yet they still straddled that line of actually they are able to buy homes and kind of have that, that life. And yet Kevin Smith makes this movie as that generation and sort of like just lucks into it with like, he had only gone to film school for half the semester or for one semester. He quits because otherwise he would have had to pay the other like $7,000 he owed for it. And he just lucks into this movie. Not to say that, it doesn't have its merits and it's a good movie. I just mean that the fact that it was successful is just sheer luck. I mean, just like it is for anyone to even make it in Hollywood, right? To even become an actor, unless like your dad was like, Michael Douglas or I don't know, some Nepo baby.
Well, I think at this point, it's worth making explicit that the man that made this all a multi-million-dollar success was the one and only Harvey Weinstein.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of gets to the rot that's beneath that Gen X ethos, that you really can pull yourself up and make this sort of movie.
Well, Clerks was a festival movie, right? That's how he got bought and distributed by Miramax. Was it Sundance? I think it was Sundance. But I mean,
I thought they got to Sundance because of the Miramax interest. They were playing in a much more local, small festival.
Yeah, I think someone randomly saw the movie at some local theater and then called some executive at Miramax. And then they said they would put it into the festival.
Yeah.
Got it.
So again, all lines lead back to Harvey Weinstein, who made this a huge movie.
I mean, for as rough around the edges as the filmmaking is, because there's some parts where like I can see someone in the reflection over there, or like these shots don't match or whatever. Like Randall didn't remember his line right there. As much as that stuff is in this, it is like it's a very unique movie, especially for this time. Like how I said up top, it's really just a movie about people talking, and it has like a very punk rock aesthetic. It feels like something. I don't know if you're into film at that time and you're at film festivals, studio like it feels kind of like a lightning in a bottle kind of thing. Like, oh shit, I didn't know that like you could do a movie like this. Especially when you learn like he's a 23-year-old kid. I'm sure there were probably also people that were like, this is the thing, this is what the kids are after. We got to chase this. So. While they're like you're saying, like a lot of it is luck, but he has a voice, and I think that is the thing that really defines Kevin Smith. Is like he has a really strong voice in his screenwriting, specifically how he writes dialogue.
I don't remember. Maybe you sent me this, Levi, or maybe it's in one of the making of or something. Is that people apparently come up to Kevin Smith a lot and say, I watch Clerks or Mallrats, whatever, and it's like you really captured like how people like talk to each other. And I think his response, not to them in their face, but it's like no one actually would talk this way, in real life. But in a movie, it works well because you get these long, kind of. I feel like Mallrats is even like more pronounced, where it's basically a couple people obviously at the mall, and they meet people along the way, and they just have these long conversations. But you're right, though. I mean, even with some of the, improv lines, I mean, he does create a pretty, I guess you could say a strong, improbable dialogue that I don't really think I can think of any other movies that do a thing like this. There really isn't any other.
And it's a really strong marriage of highbrow and lowbrow. is something that like he does really, really well. Because it's like you're like, oh, this guy's like this guy's smart, like he's loquacious, but he also is like a dirtbag who has like who wants to make dick jokes, and I like that is really unique, especially at that time, I think.
Yeah, just to flesh out what I showed Evan, it was an interview where he's speaking to a bunch of college kids, and the college kid goes up to him and says this, and his response is, "Nobody talks like this." But in my mind, everyone talks in paragraph-long soliloquies to each other. And so it's not how they're speaking that's natural. It's what they're talking about. Like, they're just talking about what's on their mind. It's not in service of a plot. It's not in service of higher ideals. It's just what people talk about when they're alone. And that's really what makes it interesting. And I think what Kevin Smith claims he got that sort of inspiration from are the director Richard Linklater. I'm specifically thinking about Slacker.
Sure.
A movie that I saw when I was much younger. But again, I believe that movie is just characters speaking to each other. And that's the whole movie. And I think he also, at the end of the movie, lists Jim Jarmusch as a major influence. And that's another movie director that just talks about people that speak to each other. And that's his whole raise the talk. I mean, that's all he writes about. It's all he does.
I think he was trying to make a version of Slacker. I mean, I think he specifically uses that later on, as that movie was made for something like 20 grand. So the same, he was just trying to kind of catch lightning in the bottle and do something he would be proud of. And I guess, well, this is another thing that's maybe, I was about to say the elephant in the room, but it's not really the elephant in the room. But like, there's lots of dialogue in this movie. You know, it's even worse if you go back to, especially, you know, early 2000s. You look at some of the movies from that era, especially comedies, and most of it does not hold up, you know, as far as the kind of jokes they're making. I think in Clerks, there is a mixture of things that you would say doesn't hold up, things you wouldn't see, you wouldn't get put in a movie now. But at the same time, it does mix those things with smart, you know, observations and smart things. So it's almost like this, you know, unholy marriage of these like really kind of offensive-y things that it would have been really weird to watch with your parents when you're in first grade, you know, or I guess you wouldn't really understand what those things meant, but your parents probably would be the ones that would be uncomfortable being like, why are they talking about snowballs and your kids, you know, right there? But I don't know. I don't know what you make of these kind of things. Of course, you know, when you look at these things, it's easy to say, well, sure, he's using the, you know, different slurs or whatever, especially certain characters. So I don't know what it sounds lame to say what you make of that, but what do you make of that?
I think it kind of, I don't know, the way the movie is, the way the characters are presented, you're not supposed to necessarily think any of them are like great people. They're just normal people, and they're going to say things that are fucked up and that like people shouldn't say. And yes, within the context of it being 30 years ago, like I think we have a tendency to kind of give it a pass. But even when I was watching it when I was younger and finally at an age where I could kind of understand it, I wasn't thinking like, oh my God, he just said that. Like, of course he did. He's a dirtbag. Like, it's not being presented as like they're talking this way and using this language. And there was like one song that was in the background of it. I can't remember what it's called, but I'm like, oh my God, like what the fuck? Like they just dropped like 3 different slurs. It's not presented as like, this is fine. It's like, no, this is just shitty, stupid 20-something-year-old behavior. And, you know, these people are barely adults and we're not supposed to think that what they're saying is right. Like every scene with Jay, he's a dumbass. And that's his entire character. And he says some of the most ridiculous shit in the movie. But in the context of who he is, it's like, oh, well, of course he's going to say that.
The stuff that comes out of Jay's mouth, like you're saying, it's like we understand that Jay is a moron and he's going to say like this dumbass stuff. It doesn't excuse a lot of the stuff. I mean, there's a lot of like the sex politics and gender politics in this movie are not good. And I think Kevin Smith would be the first person to say like, yes, no, they are not good. You know, just weren't thinking about those things back then. So with like Jay, I don't mind it as much because I'm like, it's Jay. He's going to run his mouth about that stuff. But what really stuck out to me on this watch was like the slut shaming of his girlfriend and like the whole 37 dicks thing. That kind of really like rubbed me the wrong way in a way that it hadn't ever. Just that like the whole catalyst for like this split in their relationship is that he found out that his partner was a sexual being and like had been with other people other than him, and they don't really resolve that in a way where Dante learns anything. Like, there's never a scene or a moment where she's like, yeah, Dante, like, I enjoy sex. I enjoy sex with other people that are not you. And I've done that before. I'm a sexual like, you have to accept, like, I'm a person like you're allowed to fuck. I'm allowed to fuck. Like, that never happens. He's just is kind of like, oh, I guess the 37 dicks isn't that bad. So there's not like a lot of growth that happens. So yeah, not my favorite. Although, like, don't suck any dick on the way to the parking lot. Hey, get back here. Like, that's still, like, that's
hilarious.
That's a good joke. Like, that's a good joke.
37. My girlfriend sucked 37 dicks.
In a row?
Hey, try not to suck any dick on the way through the parking lot. Hey, you, get back here.
In a row? Like, that's every time. So it's like, I don't know. And I don't disagree with you, but I do think that at that point they've already established that Dante's kind of a shit. So him not being able to see past people she had been with like years before they were even together, it's not presented as a reasonable opinion. And like, he doesn't really grow throughout this entire movie. I think it would be unrealistic if he did, because it's one day. It's one day, and he's like, well, I know he's supposed to be like 20 something, but he looks like 30. But okay, so he's 20 something, and he's not going to suddenly have an epiphany where, yeah, you know what? Suck as many as you want. It's in the past. Who cares? He's not there yet. Maybe someday he would be, but I didn't bother to watch the sequel, so I don't know.
Yeah. And one thing I was actually thinking about when it comes to Jay is that in addition to him having all these, like, probably the most crude and just douchey and dumb things he says, there's a scene sort of near the end. Maybe it's the last scene that you have Jay in when he actually comes into the store to maybe buy something or whatever. I don't remember exactly what he comes in. He actually does have like a legitimate insight to give Dante about, you know, you have a girl that like loves you and brings you lasagna, you know, and he says it in, you know, Jay speak, but he actually has an insightful thing to say, well, why don't you just hang on to that? You know, what are you being such a dumbass for? And it's so ironic that, you know, Jay, the guy who's the drug dealer in front of his convenience store, is the one that kind of has this, even more so. Usually it's Kevin Smith's character in these movies that has like the one line, you know, that's kind of profound. But I feel like Jay actually has the more profound thing. And coming from him, it almost maybe gets lost. I don't know. I hadn't noticed it quite as much in other times that I've seen it, but this few times I did.
Yeah, so Jay's line in that is what you say. He talks about the lasagna and how he's bringing food. But apparently that was because Jason Mewes, just could not remember the actual line. So he sort of stumbles around it. And that's why Silent Bob at the end says the line deadpan, you know, there's a million fine looking women in the world, dude, but they don't all bring you lasagna at work. Most of them just cheat on you.
So that was actually Mewes' line?
That was the line he was supposed to be saying, but he was just too messed up to say the line. And so he just rambles on and on. And then you can see there's a ton of like takeaway cuts. And it's like spliced together. So Smith tried to get Jason Mewes to say the line correctly. Right. He just could not.
He was drunk, like you said, most of the filming.
Oh yeah, he was drunk, high. He was on all kinds of things. But I think even just to take our conversation back just a little bit, what's that called? The Bechdel test that you're supposed to use for deciding whether a movie has gender equality. And I think the first part of the Bechdel test is there has to be two named women characters on screen together.
Talking to each other. No, never.
Right, and there are only two named women characters in this entire movie, and they are not on screen together ever. And the only time you interact with them is when they're talking about Dante. So they are completely non-fleshed out characters. Even though we've sort of said and talked about how none of these people grow or change, the women in this aren't even human beings. They don't have character. It's all white men, the entire movie.
Yeah, they just exist in proximity to Dante, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They only exist to serve the function of like telling Dante's story.
And serving him, like literally, right? You know, you have, you know, his actual girlfriend, who's, you know, bringing him lasagna, doing all these things, trying to get, like, moves back to local to, you know, go to the local school so that he would maybe go back to school like that. Like, that's just insane. And he's still like, well, I don't know. And then his previous high school girlfriend, Caitlin, like when she comes back, she's now essentially just like giving up this, what they kept saying, what is his job?
Asian design major.
Asian design major, which
part
is
of the job. He's an Asian man.
Right. He's gonna, presumably make a lot of money as an Asian design major.
Yeah.
Or as a design major. And she gives that up for him because she thinks that she can now change and be, a good person and not cheat on him, every time that they're together every month, which based on what we know in the movie is probably unlikely. She probably will cheat on him again with like that muscle build, I don't know. They don't give him a name. The
Muscle boy, whatever.
Yeah. Who's actually supposed to play Dante, by the way.
Oh, that would have been weird.
They gave him a name in subsequent movies. That's Rick Darris.
Yes, that's right.
That's right.
But he was supposed to play Dante, yeah.
Kevin Smith was also supposed to play Dante, and then
he was supposed to be Randall.
Oh, Randall, that's right. And then they started a rehearsal, and he's
himself as a Randall.
Yeah, he was like, I can't act. I can't do this.
Well, I mean, it's hard to say like, oh, what would have been like if they didn't have, Brian O'Halloran as Dante in it. I mean, he admitted too, he was not very confident about this, had never done a film before. And it's kind of, I would say like some of the performances are kind of impressive given the complete lack of any kind of training. I mean, some of them were stage actors, but not like in a local, New Jersey stage play. They weren't like on Broadway or something, they're just these random guys that he knew.
What does that mean? There's some good theaters in New Jersey?
No, I'm not. I'm sure.
Yeah. Watch it.
New Yorkers over here.
Yeah, everyone's solid. I mean, like Jeff Anderson as Randall is the one who really kind of like performance-wise steals it.
For sure.
Yeah, we haven't talked about Randall at all. Randall's what is Randall? I've talked about this. Like, is he an anarchist? Is he a libertarian? Like what? Because he gives Dante like basically a pull yourself up by your bootstraps speech at the end, but it's not rooted in like the same kind of like make something of yourself. It's more just like who gives a fuck about any of this shit?
Feels like a nihilist.
Yeah, it's like a very backhanded bootstraps conversation because I think as part of it he says like Jay's got it figured out. He doesn't pretend he's any better than us, and we're not any better than him. So he's just sort of saying like, yeah, we should probably do better, but why bother?
Yeah. But if you're not going to, then stop bitching about it. Like, stop talking to me about it because it's exhausting.
He's accepted his lot in life, and he says that, you should just accept yours or change something and stop bitching about, between the two of them. And I don't know, his politics, I don't know about anarchist. I don't know. It's almost like he doesn't have politics.
Oh, no.
He doesn't have like I don't know. I hadn't thought about Randall that way.
He's just kind of like chaotic neutral. He doesn't seem to be that interested in anybody else. I mean, the closest thing to politics, as like explicit politics in this movie, besides the Star Wars scene we already talked about, is Randall is the one that wears the Soviet Union hockey jersey. And his cat is apparently named Lenin's Tomb. And I don't think we're meant to make anything out of either of those observations, other than he's probably just the punk aesthetic.
And then they throw in the friend, the Russian singer, which apparently was just literally based on some people he knew at the mall who would actually sing the Berserker song, and then they just put it into the movie. So it was but yeah, I almost think that having him wear like a Soviet jersey and these things were just things they just thought were funny. I don't think they were done for any kind of actual political or placeholder or anything. It's just probably no one who saw it at the time because, at that time the Soviet Union had just, collapsed only a couple years before. So it wouldn't be so weird to have.
I was listening to the commentary on the Clerks 10 years reunion, and they actually talked about the jerseys in the reunion. Apparently, the two jerseys were obviously just owned by Kevin Smith because there was no wardrobe department. People just wore what they had, or Kevin Smith brought it from his flooded childhood home. And the Penguins jersey that Dante wears is because Kevin Smith had a girlfriend that lived in Pittsburgh and went to CMU. And the CCCP jersey was just something Kevin Smith had because he thought it was cool and funny. And that was it. But there was nothing more to it. And at one point he even says on the commentary that he wishes he still had it because it's probably worth a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the furthest he talks about it being the Soviet Union. Is it probably worth something now?
So really everything is just, this is what we got.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The scene with the milk person in the store that's, trying to find the right milk, that's Kevin Smith's mom. She apparently
the artificial insemination woman, that's Kevin Smith's sister.
Yeah. They just brought in people to do things. I know we were talking about Randall, but there's actually one scene that maybe just the way I'm thinking about it when I watched it the last couple times recently, when they have the person who's in the store that's checking all the eggs to be perfect, and they say, the person tells them, that it's a guidance counselor at a high school, and they basically say, like, if that was my job, you'd hate your life too. I don't remember the exact line, but it's kind of an interesting, again, this might just have been a throwaway type of thing. I don't know how much thought was put into it, but I don't know what you make of that, if you think it even has anything, but it's sort of, I'm sure that's not an easy job to be a high school guidance counselor or a middle school guidance counselor, and trying to help these kids probably in a district that has, shit ass, budget, I don't know. And at this time, you probably start seeing the, collapse of all these towns and their, schools and all these things if you weren't in a wealthy area, which I don't think this is considered to be a wealthy area, right? Or is it more working class?
Leonardo, New Jersey.
No. Especially not around this time. Because like Asbury Park, that whole area has gotten really developed now, but it's not. But back then it was not.
No. Now it's like hip, but that took a long time to get there.
And even during the production of the movie, I guess there was a hurricane that went through and destroyed a ton of the housing. Kevin Smith, the reason he was able to get so much money was from an insurance claim, because his mother's home was destroyed and all of his things were just gone.
Oh, damn.
So the whole area is, I don't know that we've mentioned this explicitly, but this is a movie made by a working class guy in a working class neighborhood about a working class life.
Yeah.
So if there's anything authentic about what's being said in this, which we've said multiple times, that this is about his life. I mean, this is a working class movie through and through. Every person on here, none of them are professional actors. They're all just working their day jobs and doing theater on the side. I mean, Kevin Smith was working in the mornings, closing up the convenience store, and then beginning film. I mean, he had less than an hour's sleep on a lot of production days. This was truly a film of passion among his friends. In that same commentary on Clerks X, there's a question where they said, like, how has this movie haunted you? And Randall, the character Randall, the actor for Randall, says, Jeff Anderson, that he didn't even think this movie would last 10 minutes after it was made, much less he would be talking about it 10 years after it was made. This was truly just for fun. All of these people just wanted to do it. People weren't making money on this movie.
Now it's in the Library of Congress Preservation of the National Film Registry.
Wow.
Take that.
You made it.
To circle back for just a second, I 100% think that the guidance counselor line is a direct dig at whoever Kevin Smith's guidance counselor was in high school, because he probably really resented saying, hey, I want to go to film school, and his guidance counselor being like, well, don't you think you should do something a little more practical? Like maybe try liberal arts at first, or I don't know, like a business degree or something, because
design major.
Yeah, like anything that's a little more marketable, like, because that's, for a lot of people, that's the guidance counselor experience, is them pretty much just, I don't know. I've never had a good one. When I was in school, I never really had a great guidance counselor. But I think that was a direct hit from him to whoever his guidance counselor was. That's how it felt for me when I watched it anyway.
Yeah, I don't know where our collective hatred towards guidance counselors came from. Because I feel like guidance counselors are regularly the butt of the joke. And I'm like, seems like we should all really uplift those people. They're just like, they're there just to be like, hey, what do you need? I'm here to help you. What can I do? Some advice? But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, the joke in almost any movie is like, fuck off, Basically, that's the collective way it's described pretty much by everyone.
I mean, those are like the characters that are trying to help Dante. Or his guidance counselor was probably another person just like his girlfriend that was telling him to make something out of his life, in the same way that there were probably very similar characters in Kevin Smith's life trying to tell him, like, you got to drop this comic book thing, you have to drop this film thing, you got to get a real job, you can't just be working at the Quick Stop the rest of your life.
So that line is pretty much the equivalent of like when a rapper's like, fuck you, Mrs. So-and-so, and whoever else said I didn't make it or wouldn't make it, and it's like they're fourth grade teachers and things. It's like that.
Yeah.
I mean, if it were in Mallrats or Dogma, I think it would be like that. Be. But in Clerks, it's just kind of like, if this film didn't make it, if we had found this just like rummaging around a New Jersey yard sale, it wouldn't hit the same way.
No, I think maybe it was aspirational.
Yes.
Yeah.
My favorite of the customers or the customer bits is the Chuli's gum representative. Yeah. That's a fun one. Because the guy shows up and is getting all the customers suddenly like dozens of customers in this store to turn on him because he's selling cigarettes. Turns out he's just a fucking Chuli's gum representative. I wonder if that was something that happened to him, but yeah.
And that's where we get to actually see Veronica for the first time, and she comes and saves Dante.
Oh, that's right,
again,
with the fire extinguisher, yeah.
Yeah.
Always doing stuff for Dante, not for herself ever. Yeah, I wonder, like, was that a big thing in the mid 90s of just people finally being like, yeah, cigarettes is actually bad for you? I mean, obviously people have known for a long time, but was that like the start of the, campaigns for, teens and all that? I don't know. I can't remember. I was pretty young.
Yeah. That was an early Clinton initiative to push
so that
cigarette
would have been second year.
So that would have been extremely topical for the time.
Yeah. And I guess it's yeah. And it's so perfect that then it's actually, someone trying to sell you something. And of course it's the, gum thing or whatever. Which are what, like 40 cents? He's there to get like 10 people to buy a pack of gum for a grand total of like $3.
Right.
How much is this guy getting paid to do that? I mean, it seemed a little bit off.
Probably a good amount too, because they paid for the diseased lung and all the printed out pictures and stuff. And
he had a nice bag too, business cards. His job going to a convenience.
There's actually a sign in the background too about how much cigarettes cost.
Oh yeah,
I believe it's $1.50 for a pack of cigarettes.
Jesus Christ!
So this was a different era.
Simpler times.
Yeah, you could just sell cigarettes to a 4-year-old and, just get a fine.
if a pack of cigarettes were $1.50, I would still be smoking cigarettes. 100%.
Oh, yeah. I think when I quit, they were like 12 or 13 bucks a pack, and that was in Philly. So
All the things are so
I don't know
cheap.
that it says anything about the politics of the film, but Kevin Smith himself, when he was making the movie, was not a smoker. This was purely just put in there. He actually became a smoker on the set of the movie playing Silent Bob, because Silent Bob was chain smoking.
Yeah,
so
they couldn't afford
addicted.
the fake cigarettes they do in Hollywood, so he's just smoking nicotine out there.
it's probably like a lot of like service industry people end up smoking to begin with. I mean, like you work in restaurants or at a convenience store or anything. It's the only time you get a break is if you go outside to smoke. So might as well.
Yeah.
But Randall and Dante don't.
Smoking rules. Like, let's...
It's objectively cool.
It's objectively cool. It tastes great. It's awesome. It makes you feel great. It's like if someone could just invent cigarettes that don't kill you, like every single person on earth would smoke cigarettes.
Yeah. Like, look at Daniel Craig smoke a cigarette. Tell me that doesn't look cool. It looks so cool.
Is this a good time to cut away to an ad for Marlboro Lights?
No, some kind of gum.
Left of the Projector brought to you by Juicy Fruit.
There you go.
The taste is going to move ya. I think that was the slogan.
No, but you know what that does remind me of, though? I feel like when all the anti-smoking stuff like really ramped up in the 90s, like as you were saying, as part of Bush's whole thing, so many like ads for like mints and gum and stuff.
It's true. Mentos was big. Tic Tacs.
Double mint gum with the twins.
Oh, yeah.
Double your pleasure, double your fun. That's the statement of the great mint in double mint gum. Double your sentiments, your merriment. Double your moment of fun. Double your delight with the right mint. For refreshment, it's the only one. Double your pleasure, double your fun. That's the statement of the great mint in double mint gum.
The Juicy Fruit, which is also like a really weird, if you ever Google the lyrics to like the jingle for Juicy Fruit, it's really weird. I'll play it right here for everyone.
Get your sea shined up, grab a stick of juicy fruit. The taste is gonna move ya. Take a sniff, pull it out. The taste is gonna move you when you pop it in your mouth. Juicy fruit is gonna move ya. Your juice is soft, it gets right to ya. Juicy fruit, the taste is gonna move ya.
Okay.
Oh, good.
I just heard it. There's also like the cinnamon one too. I don't remember what it was. Like a cinnamon gum. Big Red, yes.
Big Red, of course.
Yeah.
I think to sort of pull this back on what we were talking about at the beginning, this is sort of like the Gen X ethos or politics wrapped up in one example, where they're not exactly defending cigarettes in the movie, but they're definitely not defending, the anti-cigarette movement either. It's just like everything sucks.
They take no
The answer
stand, right?
is not good. Yeah, it's not even just no statement. It's just like the alternative is just as bad as what we have. So why do we even bother?
Yeah.
It's just like you called it. It's just a form of nihilism.
And I feel like probably at that point, it feels really disingenuous, all the sudden like anti-smoking sentiment, because it ends up blowing back on people who have no control over it. Like, he's at his job and this guy shows up with a fake lung and pictures of deceased lungs and starts bothering his customers, and he tries to get him to leave and he just won't, which is just like, dude, like, roll his spine already and just fucking kick him out. But he doesn't. And then he gets pelted with cigarettes. And then later on, he has to pay a $500 fine for selling cigarettes to a kid, which he didn't even do.
And during all of that, he gets called a Nazi by all of the customers because he's the death merchant.
Well, I like the scene. You were saying, Frank, you like the cigarette, the Chuli's gum representative. I like the scene when, like, what would you say his name was, Levi? The physical trainer,
Rick Darris
comes in, and they have, like, he's, giving him the hard time because he, like, grunted when he lifted the gallon of milk, and then the other woman comes in and they, like, leave together. I don't know. I just, those kind of, it's like completely improbable that would happen, but somehow in my mind, I could picture that happening at, like, a convenience store in New Jersey. I don't know why. Like, it doesn't feel unrealistic to me.
The whole movie feels very New Jersey. He just very much captured, like, the feeling of, like, random New Jersey suburb. Like, I don't know, he just nailed it. I mean, obviously, because he was there and he lived there and experienced it. But I think it's probably why my brother and I watched it so much.
Yeah, strong hangout culture in New Jersey, which I think translates into this movie. Like, this is a hangout movie. You really feel like you're just chilling with these guys.
There's nothing else to do. If it's not summer, you can't go to the beach, and you just you hang out at the store and you bullshit with people. You talk to people at work, or you go to the fucking mall.
Well, which he actually made a movie about that.
Yeah.
Mallrats. But
yeah, the one scene that I always just I think about it really hit me this last time I watched it for some reason, was the one with the guy that does the, like, over the top Jewish guy impersonation, and he asks for the nudie mags behind the booth so he can go into the bathroom, and
R.I.P.
It helps his bowel movement. And apparently that guy was just some local New Jersey guy that they had to do those lines, and they didn't tell him to do, like, a Jewish stereotype. He just sort of did it. Yeah, he just started doing it, and they only had so many takes that they just kept it. They didn't bother telling him to do it.
That was a choice. Okay. Oh.
It almost
and like Kevin Smith was, like, not that happy with it, but he was just happy that their extra had actually shown up that day, so they just didn't want to correct.
Love to find out what that guy was thinking.
Wow.
Like, why he did that.
yeah.
Guy just been waiting for his big break.
Yeah.
Just like grew up on, like, Sid Caesar and Jackie Mason, and he's like, I know what to do here.
That is kind of like the impression he's almost doing, right? It's like yeah, and that's so the underlying thing of, like, obviously this movie is not much plot happens. You kind of just get these conversations and people filter out the customers, and you have the hockey game, and you have, his old girlfriend coming in at the end, but underlying all of that is, like, a very crude, I guess to put it mildly, ending of the movie, right? I mean, it's ridiculous. And then the subsequent Clerks 2 is even more absurd. I haven't seen Clerks 3, but Clerks 2 ending is also over the top to an extreme degree. And I don't know, like, does that just play into the fact that he just was making a movie and he's 23 years old and that's the kind of shit you would do when you're 23?
Yeah, maybe. Or I don't know, like, I hate to think that it's supposed to be some sort of, like, well, that's one way to settle it, where she not, like, gets what's coming to her, but I don't know.
How do you end a comedy, like, is basically.
How do you resolve that in any sense?
Yeah, I think he was just probably going for, like, the most ridiculous, gross out thing that he could think of. And, just, like, from a screenwriting perspective, he was like, all right, well, we need to get Caitlin. We need to, like, take Caitlin off the board at this point. And, like, it's interesting because, like, Dante doesn't even, like, that's the thing that, like, leads Dante to actually, like, rejecting Caitlin and wanting to go back to Veronica. He doesn't actually make a choice. He's basically just like, oh, well, this thing happened to Caitlin. I guess that's kind of, like, out now. And another nail in, like, the Dante sucks. Like, shit, like, Caitlin just suffered, like, the worst trauma of her life, and he is just standing there complaining about it. God, Dante just sucks so hard.
Yeah, he turns it back on himself and just spends, like, a good 5 minutes just, what did he say? He just wants to stew for a little while. And that's when Randall gives him his whole, like, come to Jesus moment. Like, dude, get your shit together. You just complain all the time, and nobody made you be here to begin with, and especially not today, and you're still here. Just like, what are you doing? Shit or get off the pot.
That's when they have their fight, right? in the store.
Yeah, it was like right after. Yeah. They have a fight
that's after, because that's when Randall takes agency for Dante.
Oh, right. He tells Caitlin or Veronica what happened, right? That you basically want to break up with her.
Which is like he's trying to be helpful in that moment, but like what an insane choice to make.
I mean, Randall doesn't like, for someone who works in a store as like a clerk, he like doesn't have, I mean, maybe rightfully so, like not wanting to deal with dumbass customers, but like he doesn't seem to have like any real personable skill to actually communicate with people, really. I mean, he's rude to all the people. Obviously, that's the joke. You know, someone comes and tries to tell like, which movie should I get? And he's like not listening to them, or reading off all the porno movies with the kid who wants the happy, scrappy hero pup or whatever the movie wants, and just reading all these like obscene movies off. And like, he's just, I mean, maybe it's just that he doesn't give a shit, which clearly is what he says. He just doesn't care. And if he can still come in and not get fired, it's almost like he just wants to see what you can get away with.
Yeah, because I mean, apparently there's like no supervision at his job, right? Like he leaves and locks the door like 10 times a day. It's kind of a sweet gig. Like I honestly, that would be fine. If the pay was what the minimum wage is in Jersey now, I would take that job.
To literally watch movies, right?
Or just watch movies and just fuck off whenever you feel like. Yeah.
Job would be great if it weren't for all the customers.
Exactly. That's the rub. But that scene you referenced, Evan, is one of my favorites, when she's asking him what he thinks, and he's like, I don't know. She's like, I don't appreciate your ruse, ma'am.
That's one of the best lines, really. Truly is.
Your clever attempt at tricking me.
Oh man. Yeah. There's so many good, I mean, he seemed probably more on top of being able to remember his lines than some of the others, but yeah, some of those, like the little punchline jokes are, obviously some of them are crude, but a lot of them hold up, and I still, had a laugh on many of them,
I think to focus on Randall again for a moment, I know that there's a big subreddit or a big subculture trying to claim that Randall is sexually fluid, that he's a representation of either asexuality or polysexuality in Clerks.
Okay.
Because he talks about his extreme loyalty to Dante and how he loves him whenever he tells Caitlin to not break his heart again. It's incredibly crude, but he rents the hermaphroditic porn. He doesn't appear to talk about any sexual history in his past whenever they're talking about sex. Like, he just doesn't seem that either not that sexual, or he's sort of pansexual. I mean, it all just seems to play up as a gag a lot of the time, but I don't know what to make of it otherwise.
I've seen stuff about that too. Yeah. What were we going to say, Frank?
No, I was going to, like, I can buy that reading. And it's making me think that, like, part of that is because Randall feels more like elemental in this movie, whereas Dante is the character. Randall is almost like a force of nature. So it makes sense. It makes sense that you could then also like put this reading on it that he's asexual, poly, exists somewhere in more of like an in between space than any sort of like designated gender or sexual orientation. Because he's just like you said, he's like chaotic neutral.
Yeah, I think that would be a fair read. Also, I think he's just kind of like, he probably takes the same attitude towards sexuality that he does toward everything else in life, which is just like, it's either there or it's not. And if it's there and it's good, that's cool. And if it's not, I don't really care. Like, he's just rolling with the punches, whatever that means.
If it means watching hermaphroditic porn while being the clerk at a convenience store, like, what would you do if you walked into a convenience store in Jersey and the guy is just watching porn?
I don't know. I would ask for a buttered roll to go, and I would
get and a pack of $1.50 cigarettes, I guess.
Yeah, if I'm time traveling, I'm buying a bunch of cigarettes and then bringing them back and selling them.
Smart.
It's also funny that he goes to the other video store, like this gigantic video store, which, would be equivalent of like Blockbuster or something. And the one he works at is like some like really small local one. And like, that's the thing he chooses of all the things, right? He's not choosing some like indie art film because he's in the indie art films. He has to choose something that fits his, curious interests of whatever, curiosity.
He's also very detached. I feel like he watches stuff like that, like not necessarily for any like sexual gratification, but just like because he can, and because like it's there, why don't I find out what it is? Just like you said, curiosity. Yeah, he's just very detached.
Like, it's again to sort of like you were saying with the Big Choice video, again to the sort of apolitical nature of the movie. We're not meant to think less or more of Big Choice versus RST. We're supposed to just think of them as places that serve a purpose in the world. and they both kind of suck for different reasons. And there is no good solution. They all just kind of exist together.
I assume that the Big Choice was probably a made-up name, but it's like a perfect name for it to have used as the stand-in for it. Like the place where you can actually, choose something as opposed, not just video, but like you can make some choice in your life. Whereas where he is, he's stuck there. And so for like a brief moment, he's able to, travel to this other place, have some maybe agency over his life, and then just that was enough for him, and he goes back and that's it. And, he tells Dante that he can make choices in the same way. Like I went to, Big Choice Video. I picked out whatever I wanted. You could stop being a bitch and, pick a woman or go back to school, do anything, just do something.
There's apparently a lost scene at Big Choice. So apparently all we see is Randall just walking around and then it's done. But they filmed a extended scene where he speaks to a clerk, and the clerk is just like an anti-Randall. He's extremely helpful and like cheery, and they just get into it. But all of the footage was lost.
Oh, that's a good scene. That's a good joke too.
Yeah.
I could just see him asking where like this specific porn that he's looking for, and he's like, "Oh, just come with me. I'll take you to the back room where they would have like the little curtain that you could go to."
So it couldn't be Blockbuster, because Blockbuster was too Christian. They would never have porn at Blockbuster. It would have to be like Hollywood Video or like a local place. Yeah. Just thinking for the time.
Yeah, and Randall also makes fun of all the people for picking bad movies. It's almost like the people who are watching my movie Clerks are like the sophisticated ones, watching all the cool shit, but everyone else is watching, whatever.
Navy SEAls.
Like the one guy is like, right. Or the guy's like, the one guy who comes in, he says, "What's that movie with that guy in it from this place and this one time?" And, because people will do that.
What do you get for a child that chronically wets the bed? Those are just like those are the great lines that are just clearly pulled directly from his life.
I was going to mention one of the other like facts about the movie, but I can't remember what it was. Just the production.
Did we talk about the funeral scene? They didn't like have permission to do that or anything. They just like went there.
Oh, is that? I didn't actually know that.
Yeah, they just went.
They just walked into a funeral home and then they filmed them walking out too.
Yeah, they just did that. They didn't ask permission or anything. They just did it.
Hell yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they had to do it in one take because apparently there was somebody watching them through the window and they felt nervous.
You can't do that more than once.
It almost would be like what would happen too. They would go inside to do this scene and actually knock over the casket while they're like wasting, 2 minutes. And actually what would happen?
They did a cartoon adaptation of that scene much later.
Oh, yeah. The animated series.
I think something that we haven't mentioned yet is just the extreme copious amounts of swearing in this film. It originally got an NC-17, and it was the first movie to ever receive an NC-17 based purely on language. Because there's only, I think, less than a second where Randall shows a magazine that has a woman spread open on it, and you can't even make it out because the film quality is so low. And the only reason it didn't get the NC-17 wasn't because anything was cut, but it was because Miramax appealed the ruling, and just the sheer mass of Miramax was able to get it taken back down to an R.
Can I just add that they hired Alan Dershowitz as their lawyer?
Really?
That's right.
Yep.
I remember learning that at one point.
And so, they basically said like, we'll give you the R without any alterations in the movie. We don't want to have to deal with a lawsuit. So Alan Dershowitz, you can move on. Is he dead? No.
No.
Oh, too bad.
We'll know when he dies.
Nope. That motherfucker will never die.
Oh yeah. He's 85 years old. Yeah. Guess you're right.
We'll be celebrating his death in 25 years.
He'll reach to the Harry Kissinger age of just living forever.
Possibly.
Wasn't he was Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer too, right?
He was.
He was on the island for sure.
Oh yeah.
He was one of OJ's lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying he has no morals. Oh, he was also Harvey Weinstein's lawyer, which is also ironic given that this is a Harvey Weinstein. And also why I think you and I talked about this, Frank, when we were on the Dogma episode, is why it's so hard. The DVD is like impossible to buy because Harvey Weinstein still owns the rights to Dogma and won't sell them to Kevin Smith.
what a piece of shit.
He's in fucking jail. And he
For many
won't,
reasons.
like he probably needs the money to pay off his lawyers and shit, but
Well, who also wants to give Harvey Weinstein a bunch of money right now anyway?
Sure.
There's no easy way to spin Kevin Smith buying back Dogma.
I
Just
know at
in a
some
running
point.
list of all the things he owns, everybody who's like a real piece of shit who still owns the rights to stuff, just a running list of things that it's like extra okay to pirate.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think it's your
I think it's on
duty. It's your
YouTube.
duty to just to keep downloading Dogma over and over. So just to get.
And seed it. Make sure you're seeding so other people can download it.
That's true. Yes, you have to. We should just make copies of like bootleg DVDs and go down to Canal Street like you used to be able to, and sell copies of Dogma on the street. Although I guess you'd probably get arrested. I don't know.
I think just the one thing to go back to the swearing, I think one thing that's interesting about it is that part of the movie, I guess, hasn't aged very well because it's not as shocking as it must have been in 1994 to go to a theater and see people just swearing so much. When we now have Comedy Central where Clerks can play basically unedited and it would still be more tame than, half the episodes of South Park. So there is something to like credit for the ground that was broken by, I guess, making so many dick and fart jokes in as condensed amount of time as possible, that it allowed for so many more movies to come off as more tame just by lieu of not getting an NC-17.
I wonder if someone actually has clocked how many curse words are in it, and if it actually is the record for most in a movie.
Oh, somebody's done the math.
Yeah. I was gonna say maybe like a Quentin Tarantino movie might be up there with them, like Pulp Fiction or something.
I think it's super bad.
Oh, I think you're right, actually.
Yeah.
There is some running count of like the actor who said the most curse words in movies, and it's not Samuel L. Jackson. It's the guy who's in Superbad. What's his name?
Seth Rogen?
No, the younger one.
Jonah Hill.
Jonah Hill. He is the most curse words ever spoken in movies combined.
Really?
Because of Wolf of Wall Street and Superbad, and then there's another one that he also has just cursing constantly.
Knocked Up, he curses a lot, but not as much as I don't know, they all kind of blend together after a while.
Yeah. I can't remember it, but yeah, like most people would assume it's Samuel L. Jackson for whatever reason. He's like third, I think, on the list of the most. But
Joe Pesci's got to be up there, right? Like he's like, I feel like it's been a while.
Joe
now.
Pesci, yeah, or yeah, I don't know. Oh, you found it, Levi. The films that use the most. Oh, number 2 is Fuck, the documentary.
And Wolf of Wall Street's number 3.
Wolf of Wall Street, 569. Jesus Christ!
Wow, and that's just the one word.
Yeah,
just the fuck word. Okay.
that's how he gets so high up on the list there for
That movie's
Uncut
also
Gems.
over 3 hours long.
Is it that
Wolf of
long?
Wall Street. Yeah, Wolf of Wall Street is right around 3 hours.
You're right. 3 hours. Yeah, that's crazy. Uncut Gems is also near the top, and that's kind of crazy considering it's only 2 hours. So I guess per minute, they probably have more fucks in there.
Probably speed ran that. Yeah.
Casino in here too. Yeah, there's some ones in here that I would expect.
Which, I guess, to the point that I was making, Clerks doesn't even appear on this list.
Wow.
And it got an NC-17 based on language alone.
Yeah.
Damn.
Which is crazy because Casino came out the year after. I wonder if any of these movies came out before it.
It looks like a good 12 of them did.
Before, I see, you're right. There's the year.
Scarface. Out of 176.
But Randall does say "come" like 15 times in a row in that one part. I feel like that probably.
Oh, where he's talking about jizz moppers.
And also when he's ordering the porn.
Oh yeah.
I feel like in the ranking of objectionable words as far as the rating people go, "come's" probably a little higher up.
Yeah.
Also, he says "cunt" a couple times, which is also a big one if you're not British or Australian. So.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, But I mean, you could be right. I mean, that's when I do look at like this list of the top ones, most of them came afterwards, and probably. I mean, I'm not saying that Wolf of Wall Street wouldn't have cursed that much if it hadn't been for Clerks, but I'm sure it was on the mind of people being like, well, apparently you can just say whatever the hell you want in a movie, and you still get that R rating. They probably could be like, see, Clerks only got an R rating. You can't give me an NC-17, unless you show. And Wolf of Wall Street is also, I mean, very offensive and crude movie, terrible message as well.
The funny story behind that list that Randall reads, apparently, he was supposed to read it actually in front of that little girl, but then he doesn't. But that's a pretty commonly told story. But apparently that list that he reads he was literally just reading that list. And in the middle of it, he just said, like, I can't do this. Kevin, you have to change these names. So he handed it off to Kevin Smith, who just like sits there and it looks like he's crossing it out. And I guess he crossed out 2 of the names, but added like 5 more. They were even more vulgar. And he handed it back to him. And I guess that's where Jeff Anderson says like, okay, I guess this is the movie that we're making.
It's kind of shocking that anyone at that point, whenever that was in the filming, that like that was the bridge too far, just
Kind of, yeah.
but some of them were, I mean, they didn't have it would have been funnier if a lot of them had been like more, double entendres or like plays on words, more of them, because then it would I don't know.
Creative porn name.
Yeah.
Whatever happened to that?
It's a lost art, apparently.
Yeah.
I think it went the way with the video cassette.
Yeah. We sucked out as much politics as we could from Clerks.
I think just as a final note on the politics, as far as a working class movie goes, the politics are pretty good because work does suck. It's terrible. And it really hammers that point home. There's no redeeming qualities in working, and we'd all be better off not having to work.
Yeah.
Yeah, the mundanity of it.
And that's a point that's just completely lost in Clerks 2.
Yeah, I watched that recently, and I wasn't that impressed.
That's another episode. That's why you got to hit subscribe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Doing my promo for me. Cause...
If you get 10 angry comments from Gen Xers, then you have to do a Clerks 2 episode. They have to be different Gen Xers. They can't just make new accounts or whatever.
Yeah. Can't be a Gen X bot.
Yeah.
No, it's going to be a Clerks 2, Clerks 3 combo episode to give everyone just...
Yeah.
I haven't seen Clerks 3. I don't know what it's like.
You don't need to dedicate it. You don't need to dedicate a whole episode to either of those movies.
Right. I mean, maybe they could just be a footnote in the Mallrats episode.
I think one thing to take away from it is that, like you said, Levi, work does suck, and this movie captures that incredibly well. Probably because it's told very much from the perspective of somebody who was in it at that time. It all rings true. The way that they view customers and that misplaced frustration is pretty poignant. I think there's like a couple instances of placing blame where it belongs with the boss or the manager or whoever, but ultimately that gets lost. And that's true for reality. The working class focuses a lot of our ire and frustration at each other instead of where those things really belong and where they can actually have an impact. So I guess don't be a Dante.
Perfect tagline.
Definitely don't be a Dante.
Don't ever be a Dante.
Yes.
Not once.
I think everyone's job is you have to say to a Gen Xer, don't be a Dante, like to their face.
Such a Dante.
Don't stop being such a... Yeah, I mean, that could be what is it, like, I'm trying to think of another... There's some other movie I'm blanking on. Maybe it's in Kingpin, where he... what's they use his, like, character's name as, like, a derogatory thing. I forget. Oh, a Munson? Is that it? I don't know. Something like... Anyway.
I want to say Melvin, but I can't remember that. I can't remember that movie very well.
It's been a while since I've seen it. But yeah, no, the last thing that I'll say before we conclude is I have to think that Mike Judge making Office Space is directly influenced from this movie completely. Like it's essentially just slightly modernizing it, making it be The Office, as the name suggests, as that's the new thing, working as a computer person and getting fucked over. But in that movie, it's very explicit who the bad guy is. It's not the people working there. It's the, whatever the company's name.
But then the final politics in that are kind of screwed over, as he ends up finding work that's fulfilling being a construction worker, where he's just being screwed over by a different boss. So the politics in that are even lacking compared to Clerks.
Interesting.
I'm gonna revisit that.
Because that's like Mike Judge is a dyed-in-the-wool libertarian. That he has politics that he can put into his movie.
Yeah, I told someone that recently, and they got really mad and started defending and Judge about things. I think it was always talking about Idiocracy and getting mad that I told them it's a... I'm not going to do that. Every time I post anything about that, I always get lots of angry...
Two different kinds of angry comments now.
Yeah, the Gen Xers and then the people who love Judge. So, yeah. But Levi, Smirk, Frank, thank you for coming on to talk about Clerks.
Thank you.
Yeah,
pleasure,
and I guess...
always.
And I already mentioned, Levi and Frank, your podcast, and people probably from other episodes you've been on. I don't know if you want to very, briefly mention what you do on your shows, if you'd like.
I guess I can really quickly. Intervention Pod, history of British and American intervention with a focus on Zionism currently. We're on a bit of a hiatus, but you can find us at Intervene Pod on Twitter. intervention_pod on Instagram, or you can email us at interventionpod@gmail.com.
With angry Gen X comments, please.
Yes, please.
Yeah, please direct all of those comments to Levi. And I'm Movies versus Capitalism. It's a show that's very, very similar to this show. So if you like Devin, we do basically the same thing over there.
Awesome. Well, yeah, and you can find your podcast and all the podcasts on the internet. That's
all the
usually
podcast places.
Where you find them, and
where fine podcasts are sold.
Where fine podcasts are sold. Yeah, this will be a good moment for like holding up. It could be a good little commercial thing, but anyway. But thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you next time.